Well, thank you all for coming out to see our hometown boy, Amor. Um, I, this is my third time on the vineyard. The first time was at the invitation of Sue Ellen. I think you strong-armed her into inviting me. And I wanted to just begin by telling how we met, because it's a kind of funny author story, because we couldn't be more different. But we both lost the same award at the same time. And it was the Kirkus Prize, and it was one of those deals kind of like the Oscars where you have a little speech in your pocket just in case you win. And they took the losers out for this really swanky dinner. Remember there was like foam on some of the food? And in my book, True Vine, which is a racial history, was just about to come out. And he said, well, what are you doing for your book event? And I said, oh, I'm having a gospel choir, I'm having soul food, the family's coming that I wrote about, and my mother-in-law's making pimento cheese and chicken biscuits. And he's like, we could not live more different lives. and then for the next like 2 or 3 weekends, we ended up at the same book festivals, and my husband said, y'all are like siblings. So one of the things I loved about him immediately, and it really comes through in his work, not just the sense of delight, which is so present, but also he's just really curious. You know, his curiosity is just boundless, in my opinion. And in order to be curious, you got to put your judgment aside. And I really love that about you and your work, and that's the last nice thing I'm going to say. No. I thought that you could begin by talking about when you and Maggie got engaged, and you were already in investment banking, and it's just a really sweet story about what did you say about becoming a writer?
Okay. I wasn't expecting that as the opening question. So I guess to back up on this, I began writing fiction as a kid. I wrote it in high school, I wrote it in college, I wrote it in graduate school. And when I was 25, I moved to New York City with the intention of writing novels. That was my goal. But I was feeling a little claustrophobic and living alone in an illegal sublet, writing all day. And so I was feeling a little frustrated. I was broke. And so a friend of mine had started an investment firm, and I joined him, and 20 years later, we were still working side by side. And it was a totally fun and rewarding career, without question. But so then I met my wife, and we got engaged. And I should say that during the first 10 years that I worked at the firm, I stopped writing fiction. And so there was this dream that I'd had sort of ever since I was a kid, and suddenly I turned it off in order to begin working on, as we were building the firm. And so when I proposed to my wife and she accepted the proposal, I said, we were kind of having dinner that night, and I said, I'm not, you've got no risk that I'm going to cheat on you. I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to become a drunk. And I'm not going to go broke. But, if I don't write a work of fiction that I'm proud of, by the time I'm 50, then I really could end up, a bitter person, and I'm serious, and I said, so that's I think your biggest risk with me, because at that time I was not writing fiction. And so she was like, okay. And so, years went by, and then, eventually I was like, you know what, I was 35, and I said, I think I'm going to try to write a novel in my spare time. And she's like, okay, clear the deck, whatever time you need, you go ahead and do that, But so, yes, she married me nonetheless.
Oh, that's a sweet story. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. She deserves the applause. I don't deserve the applause.
Absolutely. Well, I thought since this is the hometown crowd, that you could start out talking about your boyhood here and how Martha's Vineyard and growing up here in the summers, right? Mostly just in the summers, how that influenced your becoming both a writer and a reader, because I know you did a lot of reading.
That's an interesting question too. From a reading standpoint, well, I'll tell it in two phases. So I decided I wanted to write fiction in first grade. It was right at the time that I was learning to read. And our teacher, I grew up in Dedham, Massachusetts. My teacher in first grade, her name was Mrs. Gom, was friends with a very accomplished juvenile poet in New England at the time named David McCord. So juvenile poet meaning he wrote poetry for the young. And so she invited him to come to our class, and he came, and he read his poetry from his books. He had published many books at that point. And at the end of the class, he gave us each a copy of one of his books. I think he signed it. And I just remember loving everything about it. I was completely amazed by the entire thing. I loved the wordplay in his poetry and the rhyme schemes and the meters. I loved the way he would observe little things in life as the subject of his poetry. I love the fact that we were all gathered around listening to him. I was very excited by the signed book that I brought home. And that night, I began writing poetry that copied his poetry. And that was it. That's from that point on, I knew that's what I wanted to do, and it would go back and forth. I'd read something, and I'd write something, and I'd read something, and I'd write something. And so from, and I don't think this is uncommon in fiction writers, that for me, reading and writing were a parallel process at all times. And I remember that this is a Vineyard sort of footnote, is that the first fiction writer who I became addicted to, and still quite young, was the Hardy Boys. And that kind of thing where I just couldn't. I was so excited, reading through to the end, and then you couldn't wait. You couldn't believe that there was 40 of them. Oh my God, and you would look at the back, and there were all the titles in the back, and this is the greatest. And my father at the time, we didn't go to restaurants, and we didn't go to Europe or whatever. We didn't do travel too much, but one of his things was, if you want a book, I'll buy it for you. And so I remember that summer, I would read the Hardy Boys book in a day, and that night I'd be like, okay, you got to get me the next one. And he'd be like, oh, okay. So the next day he'd go, and I would do it, and send him out for the next one. I read like 20 in a row. And this ended up being so then, what happens, of course, as a young reader is that you do that, you sort of falling in love with narrative and with reading and with language all simultaneously. But then you're a little older, and you discover, as a 13-year-old, the short stories of Ray Bradbury, the science fiction and horror writer. I loved his work. And my mother, I remember, gave me, for what must have been like my 12th birthday or something, his collected stories. And that was a big momentous thing. This giant book. It was the largest book I owned. And the idea that it had, 100 stories in it from, throughout his career, and, how impressed I was with that. And, it was a sort of a prized possession. But then you keep moving. You discovered Agatha Christie through my dad, and the novels of James Bond. But then I'm in love with narrative this whole time. But then you suddenly get to high school, and you're 17, and you're reading, Dickens or Jane Austen or Mark Twain, and suddenly I was like, you're like, okay, now I see what is possible in this art form. All this reading that I've been doing and the enjoyment I've had in it, it's been terrific. But when you look at, Huck Finn as a work of art, the scope of it, the ideas it generates, the emotions that you go through, the beauty of the imagery, the surprises in the language, you just sort of opened your eyes to be like, okay, this is really what novel writing is capable of, is triggering these experiences. And then everything starts to ramp up from there. And so, I became a dedicated reader at that point. I mean, really reading as someone who wanted to write, wanted to understand different works. So I'm going to tell you two things that happen in this course of events that are related to the Vineyard. The first is that my father, back around this time, he would occasionally say, I think this is a book. It would be a book that he thought I would like, but it was very long. So I would probably be intimidated by it or not very interested in reading it. And so he would offer me money to read it. We'd be here in the summer, and he'd say, okay, I'll tell you what, I know I've mentioned this book 3 times and you haven't been willing to pick it up, but so now I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to give you, $20 if you're willing to read this book, you know. And it happened 3 times, and it was, the first one was The Fellowship of the Rings, the first volume of The Fellowship of the Rings, which I loved. And I immediately went for the second volume, and I was like, where's the next $20? And he's like, no, you know, I pay you for the first, second is your own thing. So I read the rest of that for free, I mean, you know, without being paid. The second one was Shogun, you know, James Clavell's book, you know, which was totally fun. And of course, it was like in every house on the vineyard that summer. I remember like the Thornbirds and Shogun were, and James Michener were, every house, they're probably still in every house, by the way. You know, yellow papered and sort of in the back of the shelf. And the third one was Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. And that, to this day, is one of the 3 favorite novels that I've ever read. And then you really sort of realize the scope of what a novel can achieve. And so that was very exciting. So, and that happened on the vineyard. But so then I get to college, I'm at Yale, and I get into my first serious writing seminar. And it was taught by an American avant-garde writer named Walter Abish. And he was a very avant-garde writer. I mean, you know, wrote crazy books. He wrote a novel called Alphabetical Africa, and it had 52 chapters. And in the first chapter, full sentences and paragraphs, every single word began with the letter A. And only the letter A. And in the second chapter, it was words that began with A and B, and the third chapter was A, B, and C, and by the 26th chapter, he could use the entire English language. And then it started going down again to the last chapter where we could only use A words. But these are fully grammatical sentences, which is quite an achievement, but nuts, right? You know, if you know what I mean. In this great way. So anyway, so he teaches the seminar, and I'm writing short stories for Walter. And at the end of the semester, he says to us, you know, I hope you found this valuable. I hope you found my comments valuable. I hope you found your input from your peers valuable, and the writing that you've been doing here is valuable. He said, but probably the most valuable thing that I can do for you is to give you a list of 100 books that I admire. And so he did. He gave us this list. And he was an avant-gardist, as I say. So all the books virtually were written in the 20th century. And they were very, a whole array of European writers and American writers doing all kinds of fascinating things with the novel. And, well, the reason I know that is because I took that list. That summer, you know, you get out of college, it's like May 5th or something crazy. And I would come to the vineyard. I would spend the spring going to used bookstores. And I'd try to buy every book that was on this list. And I would slowly accumulate them. And I would come here in the May of my college years, and I would read a book a day. So I'd be here for 2 weeks, and I'd read 15 novels in 15 days or something like that, all from this list. And it was very eye-opening because of all the sort of the wild things that he did. And that, you know, to this day has had a huge impact on me in terms of understanding the scope of the different ways that one can approach storytelling. So those are my vineyard stories for you.
Those are great.
Thank you.
Before we talk about Table for Two, let's talk about the TV adaptation of Gentlemen of Moscow. Has everybody seen it?
Anybody?
Yeah? So good. So good. I felt like the main character was a cross between the gentleman and Amor, to be honest.
No.
I wondered if you could tell us about how you were involved with this show, and I thought I don't think you wrote the screenplay, right? Yeah. I thought the tone really evoked the tone of the novel, and having had my own book made into a show, parts of it for me were hard to let go. You know, the book and the show are very different in my case, but I don't think quite as much in your case. But what was both like your involvement in it, and then what were the challenges of like somebody else doing your work?
And I should say that for those of you, who don't know, Beth's book Dopesick, which became this terrific series, Beth, yes, exactly. You know, Beth's one of the first people who really began to speak through her writing about the opioid crisis. Before it was really sort of So where before we all kind of understood what was happening, she was studying it, interviewing people, and beginning to write about it. And so, but she did write a portion of that series, and was a part of the writers' room, and which takes, I was invited to do that to some degree, and what I discovered in the early efforts of my being involved in writing parts of the series, was that, I am not a collaborator. That's what I discovered. I do not like to collaborate. Now, Beth is very good at it and good at collaborating because it takes a certain kind of personality, and so she, joined the team. Well, so for me, I stepped back, and what ended up happening is that they let me I was involved in hiring the director, I was involved in hiring the head writer, I was involved in casting Ewan McGregor and Mary Elizabeth Winstead as the leads. But sort of the idea was if I was involved in each of those hires and I had the chance to interview those people and I believed that they were the right people, then I should be willing to step back. And so that was kind of the way it was set up. So what ends up happening is the team is Ben Vanstone, the head writer, is writing. He writes the first 3 hours of the series, and he and the director send them to me. And I'm friends with Michael Lewis, and the writer of Moneyball and The Big Short and Blind Side, and so he's had written many best-selling books which have become very successful films. And we were having lunch around this time, and he says, "Hey, Amor, what's going on with Jello in Moscow?" We were catching up. He said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Well, they just sent me the first 3 hours of the first drafts of the first 3 hours of the screenplay, and they've asked me for my input, but I think that they're just being polite." And Michael, there's a pause, and Michael says, "Amor, they're definitely just being polite. And not only do they not want to know your input, they wish you were dead." So I was like, "Hey, thanks a lot, Michael." So. But it ended up being better than that. It ended up being better than that. I did. As I say, I'm not a collaborator, so I let them do their thing. And what was really wonderful about it is everybody, and I did spend some time on the set. And they are, of course, it's an adaptation. They're going to change things. But the head of costume was fully vested in bringing the book to life. The set designer was fully invested in it. Ewan and Mary Elizabeth Winstead were fully invested in the book and bringing it to life, and could speak eloquently and at length about passages in the book and what they meant to them and why they were making choices artistically. And so that was just all totally, a wonderful experience. But when we finally were watching it, my wife and I, so there'll be a scene, and it'll be just like it's in the book, word for word. And my response is, "Oh, that's very nice. That's very good. That's very good, that scene, And then there'll be a scene which is different than what I had written, and that'll make me kind of start to fidget in my seat. And we're watching this scene. The Count is with his childhood friend. It's very emotional. But it's not in the book. It's not the way I would have imagined them interacting. And so I'm kind of fidgeting in my thing, and they're getting into this emotional conversation. And I'm turning to my wife to express my moderate indignation, and she's crying. And I'm like, "Honey, that doesn't happen in the book." And she's like, "I know, but it's so beautiful." So you get that's a lesson too, right? So you're sort of like, okay, all right, they change it, but sometimes it's for the best reasons, and so. But anyway, in the end, I think that it's a wonderful job, and I think Ewan McGregor is incredible.
Incredible. Did you have a little Hitchcockian scene?
I am not in it. I'm not. Were you in Dopesick?
I'm in episode 3. I'm Barbara Mullins, editor of the journal Pain. Took about
So jealous.
14 takes to get it.
Yeah.
So tell us about Table for Two and why you wanted to do a short story collection. You mentioned earlier that some of your first fiction writing was stories, but talk us through that decision, and also the last story is really long. You call it a novella, but it's as long as a novel, really.
Yeah.
So talk about the packaging of that, and what's the main takeaway? Because I know you do lots of plotting before you even start a novel.
Okay, so What ended up happening is as we've talked about, I have written short fiction since I was young. I've written short stories all my life. Everything in this book is written in the last 8 years. So this isn't old stuff. It is relatively new. I was actually, when I finished The Lincoln Highway, I'm a planner. And I've talked about this before on this stage, but when I have an idea for a novel, or let's say for a novel for a second, it usually comes to me as a sentence, like a guy gets trapped in a hotel for a long period of time, That was the sentence that launched the idea of A Gentleman in Moscow. When I have an idea like that, usually it comes, if it's interesting to me, I very quickly have a sense of a whole variety of things about it. Right away I knew, oh yeah, this could be in Russia. It could be about an aristocrat sentenced to house arrest. It could be start of the time of the revolution and go all the way to the Cold War. And he could live in this fancy hotel across the street from the Kremlin. And usually I know that kind of thing in the first 10 minutes. And in the case of Lincoln Highway or Gentleman in Moscow, in the course of the next 24 or 48 hours, I will tend to have sketched out all the major events and characters in the book in shorthand. But then what happens is, if I'm still interested in it, is then you start to dig into it. And so I will then spend a couple of years filling notebooks where I will try to imagine everything that happens, all the characters, their backgrounds and personalities, all the settings in intimate detail, the interactions, some of the tone for sure, some of the imagery, some of the philosophical components, some of the allusions and allegories. I'll be working through my notebooks, filling them, getting to know the story in greater and greater detail. When I feel like I know the thing from beginning to end and I can see it all in my head, then I outline it and I start to write it. So this is sort of a multi-year process just to get me to the process of beginning to write chapter 1. So and usually when I'm doing all that design work, that I call it, I'm doing that while I'm designing A Gentleman in Moscow while I'm writing Rules of Civility. I'm designing the Lincoln Highway while I'm writing A Gentleman in Moscow. So when I finished the Lincoln Highway, I just spent a bunch of years designing my 4th novel, and which begins in Cairo at the end of the Second World War and ends up in New York in 1999. It's called A Sprawling Tale. And I got about a third of the way into writing that novel after the Lincoln Highway was done. And I realized that two important characters in this new novel had appeared in shorter fiction that I had written recently in the last 10 years. And I thought, what I really would like is for these characters to be introduced to my readers through these stories before they show up in the novel. So I stopped the novel and I shifted gears and went to work at completing this collection. Now at the time I had written probably 3 of the New York stories, and I'd written a little bit of Eve in Hollywood. And so I cleared my desk and I went and finished the 6 New York stories. And Even Hollywood at that time it already existed. It was a 50-page story, which I had written in the aftermath of Rules of Civility coming out, because Eve is a character in Rules of Civility. And in Rules of Civility, she leaves New York City after going through an accident where she's disfigured, she doesn't like her job, she has a relationship that goes bust, and so she says, I'm leaving town. And Katie, her best friend, who's the narrator, says, what are you going to do? And she says, I'm going to go home to Indiana. And instead, as her train is pulling into Union Station in Chicago, she extends her ticket and goes to Los Angeles in 1938. And Katie doesn't hear from her initially. And the first thing that she hears, and she describes this in the epilogue, is that in the spring of 39, a friend gives her a gossip magazine in which Eve is coming out of a nightclub on the arm of Olivia de Havilland, and the caption of the photograph is Gone with the Wind. So this is in Rules of Civility, and when Rules of Civility was done, I just could not stop thinking about what is Eve doing in Hollywood. So at that time, I wrote these sort of 5 little brief glimpses of the first 5 people she meets on her way west. The first one is a retired homicide detective who she meets on the train. He observes her extending her ticket, and he's fascinated by why she did this. And eventually they have breakfast together, and he gets to inquire. And you can then meet, she gets to LA, moves into the Beverly Hills Hotel. And she meets this series of people, and we kind of see get a glimpse of how she might impact them, but it's very short, very enigmatic. And when I handed in the manuscript for Table for Two, it was the 6 New York stories that are there, and it was Eve, but Eve was 50 pages long. And the minute I sent it off, I said, you got to send it back. Because I already knew in the back of my mind so much more about what Eve was going to do in the first 9 months in Los Angeles, what was going to happen to her, what was going to happen to the other people. And I felt like I really should see that through. And so I got the manuscript back, and I boarded a plane, and I flew to Los Angeles, and I moved into the Beverly Hills Hotel, because that's the kind of sacrifice I'm willing to make for my art.
How long?
Yeah.
How long?
I was there for about 10 days. But I opened up Eve and began writing, and they ended up being 220 pages. So it's half of this text. And I think it's totally fun. So that's the story piecing together. But you asked kind of another thing, which can I go on? Which is kind of when I finished it. One of the things once I finished the book is one of the things that kind of really was in my mind was having just written these 3 novels over the course of a decade, let's say, and then done all this work in this short fiction in the more immediate past. I was very conscious of thinking about the difference between between writing long form and writing short form, and to talk about that, I want to set this up by telling you that when I was in high school. My English teacher was a guy named Dick Baker. He's still alive. And he was an amazing educator and a man of great intellectual honesty and curiosity and academic charisma. And he was the first person who taught me and my peers how to read well. So reading with a pen, dissecting a novel as you're going through it, understanding what images are reappearing and the motifs and how the structure is working and what themes are hidden in it and built into it and how you discover them and mine them, as it were. He was the first person who taught us that. He's the first person who taught us how to write well, to write a paper on a novel where you're drawing evidence out of the book and using it to make your case for what the book means, let's say. So he had a great influence on me. And when he would hand back papers, they would be covered in his handwriting of, the shortcomings of your work or the strengths of the work. And when he would hand back my papers, the most common comment in the margin was SUG. And what that stood for was sweeping, unsupported generality. And he meant that as a criticism, when in fact, it's kind of my superpower. But anyway, so I'm going to share a sweeping, unsupported generality with you right now about the difference between the novel and the short story. And so here it comes. And in novels, I think, consciously or unconsciously, in the first, say, 30 pages of a novel, a writer has to be very focused on orientation. Again, whether it's conscious or unconscious, in those 30 pages, the writer is going to be focused on giving you, the reader, a sense of when this is taking place, where it's taking place, who the key characters are, at least some of them, maybe some of incidents in the recent past that have bearing on what's about to unfold, potentially some foreshadowing of where it's going. We might introduce some imagery that'll become motifs over the course of the story. But all this is there. And I promise you, if you go take a novel you admire, well-written novel you admire, and you go back and read the first 30 pages with this in mind, you'll be amazed at how much information has seamlessly been given to you as you launch the story. Now, this is very important because in reading a novel, the way we construct meaning is often through, say, the evolution of a character, how they're changing. It's the way in which a sequence of events unfold. It's how themes are layered on top of each other. It's how images recur. And everything that I just listed there is basically about a progression that has to have a starting point. So it's in the orientation phase where we establish a base,
And from there, we then understand, we can follow the changes and the images and the events as they unfold in context. And through that, we can begin to assemble an understanding of what this story means. All right, so as I say, very critical in a novel. None of this happens in a short story, right? Because you don't have the time for this. And so, I've come to really think of it as the short story is really more similar to, it's like you go to a restaurant and you sit down, and at the table right next to you is a couple. And they're in it. They're into it. They're in a heated argument. So heated, they're so into it that they're not even whispering. They're just talking at full volume about whatever is going on between them. And so when you say that, you can't help but overhear, and you start to try to figure out what's going on. You're like, wow, what did he do last night? And is that his wife? And how old is she? And who's Tony? And so you're kind of trying to piece it together. And then just when you're kind of beginning to get a grasp on what's happening, they pay their check and leave, And what you want to do is follow them out of the restaurant and be like, hold on, I have questions, Okay, so this is exactly for me what a short story is, right? Is that you are going to be dropped into it. The conversation is it's going. It's already emotional. There's already things happening. There's already in a relationship that change is occurring. And you have to kind of step in and figure out, where am I? What's happened? What's going on? What is their relationship? And then just when you begin to piece together an understanding of what the stakes might be and what the relationship might be, the thing's over. The story's over. And so you're kind of left as the reader to imagine where this is all going. Now that we've gotten this far, what's going to happen because of this? Because of this interaction, this scene, this event, or what have you. How is this going to affect their marriage? Or how's it going to affect his life, her life, or whatever? How's this, how does it sit with me? Is it happy? Is it sad? And so you're kind of left there to fill in the blanks. And so I think this can be very liberating for both the writer and the reader. It's liberating for the writer to not have this whole orientation and unfolding and evolution thing, and instead be able to drop in. And I think it can be very exciting for the reader, too, to sort of have that chance to sort of drop in, try to figure it out, and then be left with all their impressions for them to sort through. And anyway, so that's what I kind of think of them as how they compare.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
I dropped in at your wife Maggie's store today and had a chat with Esme.
Magnetic North.
Magnetic North,
yes.
Very cool. And Esme, also very cool. Is she a freshman, going to be a sophomore?
Yes.
Yes. And so I was getting a little scoop from her, what's your dad's research process? How is it he knows everything from history down to the history of this table and this pen? And she's like, he knows so much random stuff, I don't even know. But I read that you'll read a lot of novels set in the time periods, because you write a lot of novels that are set in the distant past. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your research process, because especially with even Hollywood, just the dialogue of the characters and phrases from the 30s, easy peasy, what's your research process for learning the way things felt then?
Many of you may remember this from the past, but I'm not a research-driven writer, so I don't really have a research process built into my work.
You just make all that stuff up?
What I try to do is pick a topic that I feel confident that I can imagine it. But so what that means usually is that I probably have some kind of foundation already in place with the reason I set a gentleman in Moscow. I could have set the hotel story anywhere. I could have set it in, under a dictatorship in South America. I could have set it in China today, where house arrest for artists is very much happening. But I would never have done that because I don't know those worlds as well as I knew the Russian world, because I'd become a fan of the literature 30 years ago and had gone over the course of 30 years and read a great deal about Russian culture. And so I felt confident, I can imagine this, based on the work that based on what I've read in the past or what I've sort of come to know. And with the Hollywood, it's sort of a similar thing. I was a fan of the films of the 30s and the 40s as a kid, and my dad and I would go to the double features in Cambridge a lot, and so whether it was Bogart or Fred Astaire or the Marx Brothers or Hitchcock, and we just kept going, and we would, and so I was a fan of that era of the movies, but then you become a fan of the stars and the directors, and then I became a fan of the whole program. What was happening in Hollywood and what was going on there, and you would kind of dig into that. And the other thing I say is that I'm also a fan of noir, and I think of jazz is an invention, an American artistic invention that I really don't think could have been invented anywhere else in the world. It springs quite naturally from the unusual dynamic of the American cultural makeup, and I think noir is the same thing. Noir, the hard-boiled detective novel sprang out of the United States in a very different kind of form than anything that had been written as sort of a detective story elsewhere. And in both cases, jazz and noir, they swept the world. I mean, every country, every major culture in the world came to admire jazz, came to admire noir. Major directors in Japan and France were, suddenly making their own version of American noir films and reinterpreting them. So, and I love all that. And I've read I've read Chandler and I've read Hammett and I've read, Ross MacDonald and just enjoyed them immensely. So it felt very natural to go tell a story in 30s Hollywood, number one, and number two, it felt very natural for it to be a noirish, so my version of a noirish tale, because both drawing from things that I had been a fan of in the past, as opposed to a research project.
Did you use much of your gentleman experience in there?
My gentleman experience? What do you mean?
The Paramount show?
Oh, no. No.
Okay. I'd like to open it up for questions.
Oh, and there we have lights. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome.
Is there a microphone drifting, or should we just have this person shout? Okay, there, I guess it's up there.
Do you consider yourself an ironic humor novelist, and why don't your socks match?
That's very interesting. Yeah. All right.
Wow.
I think that, well, thank God we limited it to questions, The stocks do match. Maybe one's inside out, but they match. I promise.
That one is, yeah.
They might be inside out. But do I think consider myself an ironic writer? I think. The answer is yes. But it's more like the way I would think of it is like irony is it's an arrow in a quiver, right? Is that as you are telling a story and constructing it, you may be drawing on all kinds of bringing different kinds of humor to the fore. It could be a slapstick component. It could be, as you say, an ironic component. There may be emotional moments that you're bringing to the fore, and disturbing and upsetting moments, and wordplay. All these things are just arrows in the quiver. And as you construct the novel, you're trying to have a feel for when does this make sense, and when doesn't it. And there is definitely in Table for Two a good dose of irony. Right off the bat with the line where the narrator, I think, has a very sort of ironic tone, which is, I think, hopefully fun and sort of in the context of the story. But that voice wouldn't work in telling one of the other stories in the book necessarily. So you have to kind of measure it against each story as it unfolds. Yep. Okay, oh, sorry, yes. And if you could bring the microphone up to her for the next one. Yeah. Do you see the red shirt? Yes, go ahead.
So you've told us about your very elaborate process of writing a novel and how you spend years in designing the format of the book. And you've also told us tonight about how different novels are from short stories, where the short story has no orientation, and the novel has all that orientation in 30 pages. So my question is, what is your process for writing a short story?
Yeah. That's a good question. And the answer is it's exactly the same, it's just abbreviated. So I still go through a design phase where I'm imagining all the elements of the story, but instead of it being over 3 years, it might be over 6 months, 3 months. And I will also outline. But in my novels, and my outline is probably 40 pages. And the outline for my short story is usually 2, where it's a series of bullet points, just sort of so I can lay out and understand the scaffolding of the events that are going to unfold. So as I say, it's similar, but just a much sort of more abbreviated version. Go ahead.
Hi, quick question. Will we be hearing more about Eve?
Yeah, that is a good question. And the answer is yes. Yes, you will be hearing more about Eve. Yes. Yes.
She's in the new novel.
Yeah, she's one of the people who appears in the new novel. So, yeah. In the red, in the back, yeah.
Hi. Yeah. Okay. This is on. This has been so wonderful hearing about your process, and I'm a writer, and I love how structured your process is. It's very different from mine, and I'm curious about the days that you can't get into your flow state, or the structure isn't serving your work, or if you feel like you have a writer's block. And how you get back in, or how you get re-inspired by the plot or a certain character, or trying to solve any issues within your work.
Okay. What do I think about that? The reality is that there's always challenges in my work, for sure. And in every book I've ever written, usually about a third of the way through the book, there is a major crisis of confidence where I doubt the entire project. This is a mistake. It's going in the wrong direction. It's got the wrong tone. The events aren't making sense. The characters are wrong. Full on loss of confidence. And that usually requires me stepping back, rethinking the project to some degree, and then often I'll have a sort of an insight. Oh, you know what? I know I know what's wrong, and then I'll kind of regain my momentum and my energy and my enthusiasm. But I might have to go back to the beginning and take this new insight and work through the work I've already written with that in mind. Okay, so that happens to me in all my books, but that's my problem. Writer's block isn't my problem, and I think that's partly because of what I do. Meaning, like, if you've thought a lot about what's going to happen, writer's block is I think is more like you don't know what's going to happen. You don't, and so you're looking at the blank page and you don't even know where to start. You don't know where you're going. You don't know where it's happening, who it's happening to. And so that can be crippling and very understandably. But if you've thought about it all in advance, that's not your problem. You could write a bad chapter, and you may say, I'm gonna have to throw all this out. But you don't sit there and stare at the page and say, what is this? What am I doing today? Now I should say that because I think this is very important, and it's counterintuitive what I'm about to say. Because I've gone on about design and outlining, I sound like a technocrat, I want to share the reason why I do that. And different writers have totally different approaches, and very effective and talented writers have very different approaches to writing. And so you have to kind of know what works for you. But the reason that I have become such a dedicated designer and outliner is related to the fact that we know that the brain has different modalities of operation. And some people talk about a left brain, right brain, in the hemispherical sense. But whether you buy that part of it or not, there's no question about it. The brain can have different modalities, and so and if you're using the left brain, right brain version of that understanding, the concept would be that the left brain, the left hemisphere of the brain is. They feel has more involved in analysis, in decision making, in precision, and things like that. Whereas the right side of the brain was more tied to the subconscious, to the poetic, to the imaginary, to the dream life. And now both hemispheres are overlapping and doing things in common, but at certain times they can come to the fore based on the task or the situation that we are in. And my experience was that if I am writing a chapter where I do have no knowledge about what's going to happen in it, I am starting with an empty chapter, then the left side of my brain has to take over. Because there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. What's happening? Where is this? Who's in the room? Why are they here? What's their background? What are they talking about? What are the implications of this? So you're kind of in a decision-making mode. And that's not ideal for the kind of writing that I'm trying to do. And so what I found is that by doing the planning and design, what it means is that when I'm in the chapter, I know all those things. I've made all those decisions, and I can change them, and they will change, but I walk in with a lot of knowledge about what's going to happen. And what that means is that I can give over the writing of the chapter entirely to the right side of my brain, where I can let the subconscious and the poetic side craft the sentences, where through that what can happen is, the unexpected insight by a character can surface, the unexpected combination of words can present themselves, a motif that I haven't even been aware of can surface, an image that is tied to images elsewhere in the book that I won't even realize for weeks until later. The emotional state of the character more likely to surface, the emotional state of the circumstances that are in the scene. Humor too, by the way. I feel like I'm trying to maximize when I'm writing a chapter all that stuff to rule the day, and so the planning thing really is how I approach that.
I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Great. There's one right there.
You said earlier, thank you. You said earlier that you put aside the book you were writing because you wanted to introduce the characters first in the short stories. And I've already read Table for Two. I fell in love with Timothy Touchette. I want to know, A, if you really did sign all of these, but which, and the 2 guys who meet in the bar at the airport. Yeah. Can you tell us which of those characters are going to continue on to the book that I assume you're going to go back and finish?
I mentioned, that Eve is, and yes. But I will not tell you the other one. I shouldn't have told you that one.
Okay, fair enough.
Last question. Come on.
I saw the TV adaptation of Gentleman in Moscow, and just before we started, my friend and I were discussing how the ending in the book and the TV series was very different. And we preferred the ending in the book. I'm just wondering how you feel about the ending that they changed.
I prefer the ending in the book. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Because, that was a perfect ending. Sorry. I understand what happened there. And in adaptation, you do rethink things. And one of the things that they decided was that early, which was cool, and I'm not giving anything away here, is that the question they asked themselves, who's going to tell this whole story? And is the Count looking back? Is it someone, a historian? Is it a member of his ensemble? And the decision was, it's going to be Sophia. But once you make that decision, which is a beautiful decision in a way, like that she's telling you these things that affected her life, things that were told to her that she witnessed, but that's the one thing that she would not have witnessed. And so that changes the way in which the sort of the feel of the final minutes of the series are told. And I think they do a very beautiful job of, you can't quite tell, is it her imagining it? Is it actually what's happening? And then that's okay, but it's better in the book. Now, but before we go, I do want to share one other thing with you. And for those of you who are here for the Lincoln Highway evening, I'm going to repeat something I shared there. Because I assume that a bunch of you were not there that night. But what it is about the role of history in my work. And it's a big enough issue that it's worth hearing twice. And the best way for me to describe the role of history in my work, it is by an analogy. And the analogy is that you are in a theater to see a play right now. And the play, let's say it's Chekhov, let's say it's The Cherry Orchard. Now what you're looking at from your seat on the stage is the living room of a wealthy country estate, Russia, late 19th century, and with fine finishings and furniture, etc. At the back are French doors, and through the French doors in the distance, you can see the cherry orchard. Let's say it's spring, so that the orchard's in bloom. You can see the white and pink petals in the distance through the French doors. Now, of course, when you look across the stage through the French doors at the orchard, what you're actually looking at is a painted canvas. Because that's the way a crew will do that, right? Is they'll paint an image of an orchard and they'll drop that behind the French doors. And so that's what you're looking at. Now, when they paint that canvas, they will not do it in a hyper-realist style. They will do it in an impressionist style, like Renoir or Monet. And this makes great sense because, on the one hand, if you did something hyper-realist at that distance, it would look odd to the eye. Whereas Impressionism sort of blurs a little bit, and that is quite natural at that kind of a distance. Now, secondly, famously, Impressionism gives us that sort of slight illusion of movement. So we can almost see with the dappled light and the shifting of the blossoms in the afternoon breeze. So that's terrific, too. Now, in front of that on the set, on either side of the French doors are bookcases built out of plywood, but painted to look like mahogany. Right? And over here is a door that goes nowhere, and here's a stairway that goes up to nothing, right? That's a part of the set. Now, but right here in the center of stage is an actual table with actual chairs, and on the table is an actual china tea service. Now, it is very important that all this stuff be actual. Because, let's say with the scene here, it's a young woman sitting at the table having tea by herself, and her brother sort of comes into the room through the fake door. He slams the door, stomps across the stage. It's obviously in high emotion. We want to hear the physicality of the wooden legs of the chair scraping across the wooden surface of the stage as he sits down and pulls his chair up to the table. And when he starts to say what's on his mind to his sister, and suddenly, for emphasis, slaps the table, we want to hear the physicality of his hand hitting the wooden surface of the table. And when the sister, who has been listening very patiently, sets down her teacup, we want to hear that delicate clink of the porcelain of the cup hitting the porcelain of the saucer. Now, as I say, this is all very important that this feel very real to you in the audience, because the reality of those elements sharpens the focus and sort of completes the illusion that you are watching this family and events unfold in real time. Now, this is exactly the way that my work is constructed. All right. For me, history is the painted canvas. And when I prepare that, I am not going to paint it in a hyper-realist style. I'm going to paint it in an impressionist style, because it is there to give you a sense of time, a sense of place, a sense of mood, but that's it. Now, in front of that in my work is a lot of plywood that's painted to look like mahogany. These are things where you can't quite tell. Did he make that up? Or is that a weird thing that's really true? And the fact that you can't tell the difference, perfecto. Okay, but in front of all that in my work is the actual table and chairs. And again, just like in the play, it's very important to me that that feel very real to you. I want it to feel so real to you that you feel like you are sitting at the table with the brother and sister. You are so close to them that you can hear the nuances in their tone of voice. You can see the shifts in the expressions on their faces as they exchange their ideas and sentiments. And as I say, it's very important to me that this feel very real to you in my work, because that's where the action is. Thank you very much. And thank you, Beth Macy. Thank you, Beth.